Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm Dave Putz from JKP Holdings, and as always, alongside Mr. Nathan Turner.
How you doing? How you doing?
Good man. It's that wintertime season. Kids are getting sick. It's all that fun stuff, and
Good
business keeps
times.
pushing along. Yeah. So you said ski.
It
I saw
is.
skiing opened up recently. That's exciting.
Skiing opened up. I actually just got back last night. I was in Chicago for a little over 24 hours.
Oh.
Had to
Hopefully, it
go.
wasn't buying notes over in Cook County.
It was completing a very long process on an eviction on a lady that never had permission to move in the first place.
Oh.
Anyway, finally happened yesterday. I did a post on it. Some people are asking some questions, so I'll give more details there. But yeah, it took a long time, and finally yesterday we got it right there, the eviction order. Woohoo!
Yeah. Oh,
So
good
that's
Lord.
exciting.
It's fun times. So we've spent the 2023 year um, away from what we've done for 15 years. In the note space buying it, we've really focused on bank originated debt. And we made a mission in 2023, our goal to get a better understanding on this seller finance, but more importantly, the wrap note subject to world. And it's blown my mind what we've learned last year.
Yeah, it's been nuts. We've been shocked, I think, at how people in the creation part of things don't know that we're around. I guess I just assumed because that's kind of the path that I took was I was creating first and then I started buying notes. So I kind of thought that everybody would know, we're part of the same business, just different sides
Yeah.
of it. So I
Yeah.
figured everybody would know we're here, but they don't. So that's been a huge part of our message here this year. And
Yeah.
it's been going well, but I think we
Yep.
still have work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get into what we're going to be in 2024, but you're absolutely right. We've been on a mission to connect with all these people. And what the common theme is, wait, you can sell a note? And
Yeah.
it's blown our mind. And I'm not negative about it, but it's just amazing that the idea you can sell a note legitimately. This isn't backdoor stuff. This is a legitimate business of selling a note to another person.
Yeah.
It's what assignments and launches were created. Banks been doing this for decades, centuries, right?
Yeah.
So it's amazing that we're teaching it, but we're also excited by it because those people who are originating notes in this year, last couple of years, have a gold mine of information and money, right? And what we're trying to do is provide the opportunity to get some of your money out of that deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe some of it, maybe all of it,
Yeah.
all
We're
different
more
kind of
than happy to
ways.
cash people out of whatever deal they're in so that they can turn around and do it again and
Yeah,
just turn it around and around and around. We can do a ton of business together,
yeah,
but we have
yeah.
to know that each other exists.
Absolutely. And what we've done too is for note buyers, just FYI, in January, me and Nathan rerunning our advanced course, which will help you build the non-performing calculator, which is a huge fee. You need to understand that financial calculator has its place,
Yeah.
but when it goes non-performing, that financial calculator could be thrown out the window because you no longer have a cash flow coming in. You really have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Debt licenses, each state, all those kind of things come into play. And our advanced course talks about due diligence, building note, the non-performing calculator, and also how to filter and build your buy box so you can look legitimate in your business.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to know how to do it. There's both sides to this. And just because
Yep.
you bought a performing note does not mean it's going to perform forever. And we came up through that world. So we know how that goes.
Yeah.
And you have to know what to do if and when it does start going non-performing.
Yeah, unfortunately, we ran into a lot of people who said, "Well, we bought performing notes. That's I don't have to worry about the non-performing side." And we shake our head and we appreciate your excitement for it, but every note can default at any moment, and it has nothing to do with anyone's control. Someone died, divorce, death, anything, job loss, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And unless there's some kind of perfect security that the seller will give you, that thing may stop performing, right?
Yeah.
So what we focus on too is for these people we're bringing on is we just talked about in our quote unquote green room is what creates a good note. I'll post into the chat. We actually I'll be putting on together. I don't know if Nathan will be part of it or not, but we'll be putting on a live call to show you guys what it takes to sell or create a note that has the ability to be sold at the highest dollar. What does us note buyers care about in creating notes? And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand that, and that's okay. That's what we're here to help you learn. So
And
we want
you
to
said, I think during the Christmas break.
yeah, I'm looking to run it like midday for some people and an evening call for those others. If
Okay.
you are creating notes, this is really for the note creators, not note buyers, right? This would be focused on note creators who want to learn how to create notes that they can sell, or create notes that are valuable, or what does it mean to have a valuable note? Outside the legal side of it, what numbers really come to play? Occupied, non-occupied, do we care about seasoning? All those kind of factors. What is seasoning, right? Creating a 100% note, or maybe you create 80-20 and get all your capital out and hold a second. All those kind of little cool ways of getting the most money for your dollar, for your note, and what not to do, right? We talk about all that often. This will be recorded. This will be on our YouTube channel as well as on our podcast. So if you missed this at all, feel free to go to those two places.
And we get that question all the time. So,
yeah.
what do you buy a
got it.
note for? What makes it a good note? We get those questions all the time. So that's
Yes.
good to
Yes. So
put that
please,
together.
there's a form on the website. Sign up. I'll be notifying everyone when those dates are and working our best. Before we bring our guests, we have one other thing we want to make sure we keep pushing out there. Coming back in early summer, we're all flying down to Nashville. We're having a big party. So Nathan, share a little bit about that for those who haven't heard us before. What's happening at the end of May?
We were so pumped. So this 2023 was the first time that my wife and I put on the DME, Diversified Mortgage Expo, and we had a blast. It was a great conference. I think it was a good balance of fun and education, and it was just a really great time. We're gearing up, as well as it went. There's always room for improvement, and so we've made a few adjustments, a few tweaks, and we're looking forward to next year already. So it's May 31st, June 1st. Actually, tickets are live now. If people wanted to go get a ticket now and
grab it, lock it in, right?
Lock it in, you could do that.
So
now.
These are for note buyers and note originators, creative finance people. Everyone in notes should get there. And one of the biggest things that I was excited about last year when he put it on was there was deals taking place and purchases being made at the conference.
Yeah, and that's a
I've
big
never
deal.
been part of it.
That's a big deal. I going to conferences and getting excited and all that. That's great. That's really fun. But if business isn't coming out of it, then to me, that's kind of been a bit of a waste of time. So that's been a big focus. Is we're there to get deals done. So come and note creators, note buyers, where both sides are there, so the money can exchange hands. So let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've done enough of the talk. Let's bring in our special guests. We are good. I believe I have the names. I got the names backwards. I will fix that as we talk along. But I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Share. We'll start with Ken over there. Share a little about who you are. How'd you get into real estate? And just what are you doing now?
That's a long-winded question you have there too. So I'll try to abbreviate that. My name is Ken Rossics. I am partner in Sub2 Empire. So Sub2Empire.com is our main business right now. Jeff's the founder of that. He'll speak about that in a second. But so as you can tell from the title, we're about Subject to is one of our favorite acquisition strategies. But we're really about creative finance strategies on the acquisition side, as well as the disposition side, which is where you guys come in. So we thought this would be a nice partnership to talk about what we're doing on both sides of that. So but a little bit about me. So I've been investing in real estate for, I guess we're going into 2024. So 23 years now. 2001 is really when I kind of got into real estate just by happenstance. And I just kind of started acquiring properties. I worked a full-time job during that time. I was in charge, when I retired, I was in charge of human resources for school districts here. We're in the St. Louis metro area.
Gotcha.
And so I've been retired now for 5 years, and real estate let me do that. I retired at the age of 45, full pension, full benefits, all of that. And real estate was the reason I could do that. So I've just kind of ramped up the real estate investing. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I have various other interests, health and wellness interests too, but the main focus is real estate. Over the years, I've done all kinds of things with real estate, just as many other real estate investors have. Buy and hold rentals, kind of straight rentals. We're down to 2 of those. We've kind of sold all those off. We're just down to a couple. We do fix and flips over the years. That's kind of what got me out of the job at, the 9 to 5 or at age 45 was doing flips. And so now we're kind of just focused on helping other people achieve those things, right? That's my goal as part of Step 2 Empire. We try to focus on the coaching. We do deals. You talked about note originators. We do that. We're private lenders. We're kind of trying to do a little specific niche and all those sorts of things. But that's just a little bit about us. And I've been doing creative stuff for, I don't know, in notes and 15, 20 years now, probably. I actually owned property internationally with seller financing, right? Woo! Costa Rica, it's all seller financing deal. We're also buying property in Mexico right now, my wife and I, and it's, again, creative financing is doing that even in Mexico, even in Costa Rica. So I know this stuff works. Like Jeff and I know this stuff works, and so we're just here to help everybody achieve their dreams.
This is awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. So Jeff, how did you get started with this whole world of real estate?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. My name's Jeff Coffman, by the way, in case you can't read, in case you're challenged in the reading department. No, I started like a lot of people did way back. I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps. Okay. And which, by the way, my hair is super long right now. Way longer than I think I've ever had it since I left the military. But no, I started reading the old Carlton sheets back in 1996, and up late one night, probably drank a little too much, and ordered the old Carlton sheets package, the no money down package. But I eventually shelved that. I just thought, well, this is impossible. But it's one of those things that never really left my conscience. And fast forward almost a couple of decades, I'm working a job that I can't stand. And in 2015, so I've been in this for almost 8 years now. In 2015, I purchased my very first. Well, I decided to jump back into it, and I purchased my very first property, investment property anyway, in the latter parts of 2015. And so, as the story goes, a lot of folks have heard me tell this story, but it's the absolute truth. When I was looking to purchase those properties, I had gone through a divorce some years prior to that. When I'm telling you I had $0 in savings, I had no savings. I just had a W-2 living paycheck to paycheck. Even though I made good money, I was still living pretty much paycheck to paycheck. I think like, a lot of W-2 people do.
Sure.
But I wanted to buy these properties, and I was like, how in the world am I going to, I go to a bank, I get a loan, I got to put 20% down. Where is this 20% going to come? So I'm freaking out. I go out and I put this property under contract, and I did have a coach at the time, but I was just in the beginning stages of that mentorship. And he kept talking, kept bringing up this idea of subject to. Now, buy it subject to. I didn't know the first thing about it, but I knew I had to move forward. So I ended up kind of wrap this introduction up. I bought my first property subject to. I actually closed that property myself, because I couldn't find a title company that would close a subject to deal. So I actually closed that deal myself, made a ton of mistakes. And in that first year, I was still working a W-2, but in that first year, I was making 6 figures, or very close to it. I don't remember exactly what the salary was, but I do recall in that very first year, I nearly tripled my salary. So from my base salary through these creative deals, I nearly tripled my yearly salary. So, my wife thought I was going to be in jail. We went through this whole ordeal where, we thought quite possibly that we might do what we called a business divorce, just kind of separate assets. She literally thought I was going to jail. So that's how I got started. And then Then of course, just like Ken mentioned, you know, I grew to love this business, and I love the creative financing aspect of it. I love being able to look at a deal. You know, anyone can buy a cash deal, but I think that really limits, or it can, if you really don't know what you're doing, it can limit your purchasing power. It can limit you to a very specific box. And for me, I just really love that whole idea of getting something in my hands across my desk that a lot of people just maybe they couldn't do something with that, and turning that into a very profitable deal. And so that's what we do at Sub2 Empire.
Similar to Nathan's story, right? Nathan got started by doing similar stuff.
Yeah, creating notes, selling properties on terms is what we called it at the beginning. Like it didn't call it a note, didn't even call it a mortgage. We were doing it was land contracts in Ohio, and we were selling houses on terms, and it made a ton of mistakes, but thankfully, you know, it made out okay. But yeah, and then it just kind of goes from there, and then you kind of pick your niche and you figure out, okay, well, I like this, and then you just kind of pursue it. So that's what I did, and then
it found me is what I like to say.
Yeah. So creative financing is a very hot word, right? Can you give an example of what creative finance really is? I'll give it to Ken. Give it to Ken. How would you define creative financing? Because it seemed like everything in real estate is creative financing, even if it's basic, which isn't true.
Yeah, so it's one of the most misunderstood terms, probably, especially for new real estate investors. But I guess from our perspective, creative financing is just figuring out a deal without the need for traditional banks or institutional financing funding, right? So it could be a land contract on terms. It could be creating a note. In the case of a Sub2 deal, wrapping, right? You wrap the land contract or you wrap the note, all those sorts of things. So it's basically just figuring out, it's cutting out what I like to say it's cutting out the middleman, right? It's me as a buyer. Let's say I'm the acquisition person. It's me and the seller of that property figuring out the deal. Between us, everything in between, right? There's no middleman, there's no loan, there's none of that stuff. So that's kind of how we view creative financing.
Gotcha.
Cool.
So when you guys talk about Sub2, we've learned a lot about Sub2. What are some of the myths or wrong things you can do with Sub2 that you guys have found over the years that people are making mistakes on?
Yeah, I would say, I'm just going to repeat one of my absolute favorite sayings, and that is in regards to subject to, you know, you may sit down with a seller and you may come to an agreement that the seller will sell you that property subject to the existing financing. But just because they will do it doesn't always mean that you should do it. And so for us, you know, we realize that a lot of our deals, they're overlooked because the numbers they don't look attractive to your standard cash buyer. But one of the things I think that's misunderstood is everybody, and this is partially true. People talk about, you know, you make money when you buy. Everybody's heard that at some point. But we kind of don't believe that, because with our strategies, we do believe it. Don't get me wrong. But with our strategy, our exit strategies, when we sell, depending upon how we sell that property, or for, you know, in your guys' case, you're going to sell a note, we can get super creative. We can kind of create our own, what we like to say, our own little economy inside each deal.
Yeah.
And so we look at it on a deal by deal basis. We don't put ourselves in a box, and we like to look at both the acquisition side. If maybe our terms aren't the greatest on the acquisition side, we know if we have, you know, the right location, you know, all the specifics, that all the boxes that you need to check on the disposition side, we know that we can make a profit on most of these deals. But again, you know, some deals just don't just don't turn out. They just don't turn out that way. Some deals are just too far gone, and that's when you call your short sale guy, you know?
Yeah.
So, yep.
Can I add something there too?
Yeah, please do, Ken.
The sub 2 stuff. I guess I just like to say one of the things in sub 2 that we'd like to be honest, open and honest with the seller, right? Who's probably in some kind of financial distress,
Sure.
right? I need to get rid of the property, lost my job, I have to move, what divorce, you mentioned all that, whatever it is, right? And so they're looking to us as the buyer, right? The investor buyer coming in there to do the deal, and they need to have trust with us. And so we want to be transparent. We want to make sure that they understand what subject to means, right? Because their name's still staying on that underlying loan, right?
Right.
Sure.
They're going
Yeah.
to be responsible for the payments, but that's still a risk to them, and they need to understand all that. And as Jeff mentioned, I think subject to is not for every property. I think that's a big thing that we see too. You can't try to force a square peg into a round hole, so to speak.
Yeah. How do you guys do your best to avoid the due on sale with subject to?
That's one we've heard coming up lately.
It is this is 100% how you set up the structure in the beginning. This is due on sale has never been a problem for us. I've known 3 people in my entire life that have ever experienced something like that, and it's not because the banks are out scouring public records and looking for LLCs, which, by the way, Fannie actually has guidelines now, as you guys may well know, that you can they accept people moving properties into LLCs all day long. How we normally do it, and the method that we prefer is we prefer to use trust. We use trust extensively. So it's a matter of how you set that trust up initially.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's one of the other things that we see is insurance. A lot of folks just don't know how to set that up correctly.
Yeah.
But what it boils down to is, and you guys as note investors know this the most, and that is, if I'm making my payment to you, 99% of the time, you're not going to care where those funds come from.
Nope.
Right. And so as long as that payment's made, and so we push that super, super hard.
100% right.
Don't get yourself, if it's a deal where you even think remotely that this deal will not pay for itself or it can't afford to make those payments, then we just don't do it.
Right.
So you mentioned like the banks are not out necessarily looking for these kind of deals. However, are they keeping an eye out? Because if they've got a loan at 3% and they could be lending it out at 8%, are they kind of a little bit more aware than they were?
Again, yes, this has more to do with how it's structured in a trust, and they could go out and they could scour the public records for trust recordings, and they could, I'm sure they could go out and take a bunch of those to court and and probably win. But it's kind of how do I want to say this? It's kind of protecting. It's building a structure that's going to protect you from that in the future, just by how you set it up on the front end, on the acquisition side. And so with the extensive use of trust, it doesn't put those red flags up like a lot of these other strategies might.
Yeah.
So it's all about doing it right in the beginning. That's what it's all about.
One of the things we found in the beginning of the year, and I'm curious how you guys teach your students, who does your servicing for your notes? Do you self-service? Do you use a licensed servicer, using software, or are you using something else?
So generally speaking, in order, and Ken, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of but generally speaking, we really like to use, on the disposition side, we really like to use land contracts.
Okay.
And so generally speaking, if our seller is really concerned about that payment being made, we will hire a note servicing company. We just went through one, BiFi, is who we went through.
Yeah,
I've used
yeah.
Evergreen before. We've used Madison Management before.
Yep.
Mhm.
All of them,
So it just depends. It depends on how comfortable our seller is with making sure that that payment's made. But for the most part, we either, it's kind of optional. It's not a standard, and that's what we teach. Is if the deal can support you self-servicing it, if you're not so busy that you can self-service, then go ahead and do that. Otherwise, let's hire a servicer.
One of the cool things we've learned is that, and another thing I would add into your contracts for those who follow you, is putting that servicing fee as a borrower expense.
Mhm.
Right? Because that makes us as note buyers a whole lot easier to buy for a little bit higher. If that payment is $300 a month and I have to pay $20 down a month, that's a little bit out of my paycheck, which means my bid has to be a little higher or a little lower to deal with that $20 for 180 months.
Right.
So yeah, I would ideally put that in the buyer side of it. Nathan's more comfortable with land contracts than I am.
Mhm.
And it's a preference, right? But I understand why you guys do it in a land contract versus a note mortgage, because technically then the deed's changing hands again, which makes it a little bit more convoluted. But it's good to see you guys are open to that servicing mentality.
Yeah, and actually we're going through this right now. In fact, Ken and I both went to court yesterday, and it's on an eviction on a land contract. And the fact is, we have it's much easier to get someone out of a property off of a land contract than it is and cheaper than it is to foreclose. So
where was the property at?
It's in Illinois.
Yeah. Just like, yes, the Chicago.
Yeah, we're talking great.
Chicago story was near and dear to our hearts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I was just there yesterday.
The one thing I'd be careful of are debt licenses, right? Technically in Illinois, debt license is a requirement. You can look up all the penalties, all that stuff, but there are certain states that require ownership. If you have a debt and you're collecting on a debt, you're supposed to be having a debt license in your name. I won't get into what happens if not or whatever, but just for people listening, and that's a certain thing. I don't buy in Illinois because I don't want to get the license. Plus, dealing with Cook County is too long of a time frame for anything, right? But there's states like Georgia where it's a 90-day foreclosure, but it requires a debt license unless you're buying your personal name. Well, then go get the debt license. It makes sense, right? That kind of stuff makes a lot of sense for a lot of us to talk about. When we talk with you guys regarding, these wrap notes, how do you lay it out to that original borrower that may want to look for a house a year, 2 years from now? How do you structure that conversation? Ken, how do you deal with the borrower who's like, hey, you're paying my payment for me, but I want to go buy a house 3 years from now. Yeah. And their debt's wrapped up.
So that has a lot of layers to it, that particular conversation. So usually, all right, the seller is distressed in some way. And so the likelihood that they're going to be in a position to actually go and get a traditional institutional mortgage and qualify again in 12 to 24 to 36 months is probably pretty low. So I think it's some education, again, being transparent with the seller, some education on what the actual situation is. We're going to take this note, we're going to take this property subject to, but we're going to pay your $30,000 in arrears to do that, right? And so that's going to affect your ability to go out there in 24 to 36 months and do anything. So I think that's the first piece of it, right? The seller education. And then the second piece of it is they're within 12, after 12 months, after some seasoning, right, they can then discount some up to 50% or if not all of that loan if they can prove someone else is making the payments for them. And so we provide that information too. And we actually just did this in that same property we're talking about in Illinois. We provided a note because they wanted to go out and buy a different property, that we were responsible for the payments. The payments had been made by us for X amount of time, and then they were able to get approved under that lender. Now that doesn't work for everybody, but we certainly do that. Saying that we've taken the obligation for those payments and it shouldn't count against them or not fully count against them when they're trying to qualify again. And we also try to, we take over a subject to note, and it might be let's say it's 5 years in, so it's got 25 years left on the term.
Mhm.
Like the likelihood that we're going to make 25 more years of payments on that is pretty slim, right?
Yes.
Like we're going to get refinanced by our third party buyer that we bring
Yep.
in, right? We're going to get refinanced out in 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? Whatever term we put into the land contracts, right? We like to do that. And in a certain amount of time, they're going to balloon us out, refi us out, and
Sure.
then we're going to get, you know, the final payment, that third piece of the payment on a sub 2 deal on the backside. So I think it's just education and letting them know, like, here's our plan. Like, there's no guarantee yet. You're correct. We might make payments for another 25 years, but the likelihood of that's probably pretty slim.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the rates are where they're at, right? We
Mhm.
expect them to go down a little bit in this world. So when we're doing this kind of stuff, you know, one of the things that seems to be a misconception is the idea that Dodd-Frank coming into play, right? And people seem to not understand what Dodd-Frank did in the whole world. How do you guys make sure that the people who are following you follow that guideline of making sure that if it is an owner occupant, that they're following the RMLS rules and you know, those kind of things? What do you guys do, Jeff, to make sure that that happens?
Well, it's again, it's a lot of ifs here, but
Yeah.
but number one, that's another reason why we love land contracts, because these are non-qualified loans. And you guys as note guys have probably read this before. But if you read through Dodd-Frank, which admittedly it's 2,000 pages long, like, but I will say, on the land contract side, you know, it is an offer to extend credit, but they're non-qualified loans. And if you look at Dodd-Frank, they are so vague on, I forget the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of the ability to repay has to be a reasonable ability to repay. Something, I'm paraphrasing here. So that's yet another reason why we love land contracts so much, because Dodd-Frank it still comes into play, but it's nowhere near as stringent. However, if we are going to, if we're going to wrap on a note, or if we're going to sell a note, that's fully underwritten by an RMLO, and you know, and that's how we're going to comply with Dodd-Frank.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And who are you guys currently using for underwriting when you need to do it? Do you use call the underwriter, using, you know, who have you used in the past? Do you have anyone in particular you guys use to do your underwriting and your originations?
No, it's really kind of a it's really kind of putting a Facebook post out there. Hey, who are you guys using for as an RMLO at this point? But I don't have anyone really particularly in my pocket. Maybe Ken does. I don't have anyone in my pocket.
No,
right now.
we don't have any set one. It's just on an as needed basis, kind of depending on, you know, where the property is and who's the recommended people in the area.
Absolutely. So we have a list of people who are nationwide. We talk to them regularly. So if you ever run into a problem, guys, reach out to us. We can give you understand that there's people who can do underwriting, which is just the math part of it. They can do it nationwide. It's the origination that's more state specific and licensing. And we're in our private weekly group. We're actually going with the RMLO, talk about who can or can't originate. We're finding out some states don't even allow attorneys to originate documents. So it's interesting to hear about, right? Because we think attorneys do almost anything they want. At least they do too, right? Sorry, Aaron, whoever's listening. But that's the idea, is that we got to make sure that the origination is correct. Because just putting a document together, we've talked to people who literally put a document together at like a diner and sign off and do it. And it's like, you can get yourself in trouble. And we don't want that. We want to buy those notes. And that's the second half of this conversation. Me and Nathan are going to be going through some of the scenarios that make these notes valuable. So hopefully those who are following you stay tuned in here for a few minutes, because we're going to talk about what we use to make your note more valuable. What do we care about?
What are the things we're looking at? What are we don't care about? Things like that.
Yep, absolutely. So Kim, with the sub 2 world, have you had any borrowers or people who are going to borrow from you have any kind of common questions or issues or concerns that seem to be repetitive, that either the original borrower goes, I don't understand this, or the past borrower has a problem that there's an underlying borrower? Anything commonly that comes up?
Really, what we've kind of already addressed from the seller perspective, especially if it's a sub-2 deal, is can I go? You're gonna be making my payments. Can I go out 12 months from now and get another loan? Like, what's the likelihood of all that? So I think that's a common one. Another common one too, yeah, is what, as I mentioned before, is I'm staying. That seller is staying on the loan, the underlying loan, right? The deed is changing into the trust. As Jeff mentioned, we use a trust structure, right? And so then the beneficiaries of the trust then become us, right? Or our LLC. And so we just want to make sure that they understand what's happening there from a title perspective, right? Because they just need to understand that. And then they need to understand that they are, in a worst case scenario, still obligated to that loan. If we can't make there's never a time when we've not made our payments, right? If we say we're going to take over a loan, we take that very seriously, right? That's our responsibility to do that because they're trusting us with that. And so we just need to make sure that they understand, though, that if everything goes sideways, right? Sometimes shit goes sideways. Like, we can just be honest about that, right? Things go sideways.
Of course.
And they just need, so we want to just make sure that they understand what that in a very worst case scenario looks like. And I think sometimes they don't think about that worst case scenario, not to scare them, but just to say, okay, if A, B, and C happens, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to try to help mitigate that. Like, for instance, what if the due on sale clause gets, what are we going to do? Well, we have a plan for that. Like, we could just refinance, we pay it off. We have enough relationships with people like you and other clients. Like, if we had to close in 7 days and cash something out just because we had to, we could. Right. And so we try to teach that, like, what's the worst case scenario, but here's what's likely to happen based on our
don't be afraid of the worst case scenario, because there are options.
Be aware, but not afraid. Yes.
And here's what we're going to do.
And 100% disclosure at all times. I mean, I can speak to that because I have had some, I had one instance in the past where I thought I'd be a wiseacre, and I had a property I bought subject to, and I found I had a buyer for it immediately right away. I was just going to wholesale this deal to him, which I would never recommend you wholesale a subject to deal these days. Never, ever do it. It's super, super dangerous. But I thought I would, somehow the dates are kind of a little bit mixed up because this was a long time ago, but I had a buyer and I was just expecting that buyer to come in and pay off all that whole underlying loan. I was like, well, cool. I just won't even bother setting this up with the mortgage, with the lender. I won't make the payment. I'll just let the buyer pay it off. And my buyer backed out literally at the closing table. So I was late on my the very first payment on that property was late. And not that it damaged the seller's credit or anything like that. But that seller gave me hell. In fact, probably up until about a year ago was the last time I heard from that seller. I mean, she was pissed.
I would be too.
And she had every right. She had every right to be pissed. And so that is just one of many lessons learned in this crazy business, we
learn mistakes. We've made mistakes with people. It's just about making it right as best we can. It's a relationship, communication business. So one of the things we were taught before about is this idea of creating a sellable, valuable note. One thing we stress upon this 2023 season is we don't understand why people are creating 5% notes. You have a house that the borrower cannot go get a loan. That's why they're buying it from you, most likely. And you're creating a note that's less than the bank. The reason they're not going to the bank is because they can't, for whatever reason, typically. Why are we seeing people create notes at 5 or 6%? I saw the other day someone posted they had 5.5 and just closed it. I don't get that. Maybe I'm just don't understand. Would you guys ever create a note today that, and the reason is, well, the borrower can't afford a higher interest rate. And my thought is, then if that's the case, the borrower is not for you.
Not qualified.
Have you ever created a note at 5% in today's world?
So and Jeff will have a little bit different opinion about this probably. So one of the rules that we do, or one of the things to do, we try to structure the end payment,
Yep.
right? The end payment so that it's at the kind of the same level as rent would be, right?
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
then the question is what does that mean in the terms? And so a
Yep.
lot of times we back into what that interest rate might be, which
Okay.
is a reason why it might come out to be 5.5%, 6%. But to answer your question from my perspective now, given that the interest rates are 8% or 8.5% now, my answer would be no. I would not go lower than a bank rate. But sometimes we structure the deal on the land contract based on what that payment can be, right? What can the payment be? And it just happens to come out to be 6% or 6.5% or 7% or whatever. I'll leave Jeff to do one of his rules about pigs and hogs, right?
We're not that far off, man. We're not.
but yes, you are correct.
It's
Generally
awesome.
speaking, we would recommend that we don't go lower than the bank rate.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that, right, if the people can't make that payment, then we just need to find a different buyer.
Yeah, and we'll talk about why first note buyers that hurts our deal in a minute for those who are watching. We're going to talk about why that, if you ever want to sell a note, why that hurts. Go ahead, Jeff. What's your opinion on today creating 5% notes?
I think it's fairly widely accepted that the credit challenged are going to get a higher rate. So I have no problem at all, being in the, I mean, definitely within the usury laws within that. But I also do have this thing, and I totally agree with Ken, like where we like to be with our rates, and depending upon the term, I like to come in, what makes owning a home attractive to a lot of people looking for a home are I'm paying, let's say the rent is $1,500. I'm paying $1,500 in rent. Well, a lot of times, especially prior to these recent rate hikes, a lot of people will get into look for a home just because it's cheaper to own a home. So
yes.
You've got this, as long as you're staying in that large pool of buyers, and you can, what I like to do is I like to come in just below where those rents are.
Yeah,
and
sense.
if I can nail that, I don't really care what the interest rate is, as long as it's not something that's super
because you guys are making this spread on the fact that you owe X dollars and you're paying that X dollar a month,
right,
and you're collecting X dollar over here. So if you have a 3% note, you can give a 5% note, you're making a 2% spread. So it doesn't really affect you at all.
Just to be fair, I've never written terms at 5% ever. Like,
yes, we've not.
But I am negotiable depending upon what the location will support, what the geography of the deal. Sure. You got to be mindful of that. You got to be mindful if you're going to go out and sell a property and expect to have a good borrower. They have to, they're not stupid. They're going to go out and look. They're going to go out and look and see, what rents are available. And if it's more affordable for them to rent, why wouldn't they just rent? I mean, and
yeah,
some people are a little less short-sighted than that. But, generally speaking, that's why people buy homes.
Yeah, it's
other than the equity building part of it.
Yeah, they're definitely they're just looking at the monthly payment, and that I totally agree. That's what I was doing way back when. Is we look at market rent and then structure something very close to that, whether just over, just under, right at, but something very close to market rent. Going forward, though, like Dave says, we're after yield.
Get your pencils out.
Yeah,
right, here we
go.
The
higher, the higher you can put that interest rate and still make an affordable payment, that's what we're looking for.
Absolutely.
Right? So I would rather you sit there and say, listen, let's make this a 10 and change the term.
Yeah.
Right. So we have in the financial calculator for you guys, we have 5 numbers that matter. The balloon we throw out the window because we don't need it. Right. We have the term, we have the payment per month, we have the interest rate and your original balance. If we can sit there and say we have a fixated number on the payment per month, we got that. And for those who are listening who not notice, we're talking P&I, principal interest. PITI is a different animal because we don't care about tax insurance. P&I is what gets affected by the interest rate.
We don't get to collect the tax and insurance. So that's
not part of return.
Part of the equation. Yeah.
Right. So we have a situation where we are collecting, you have a monthly payment, you have a original balance, which you're selling the property after your down payment, right? So you have your original start down, and then you have other numbers you can play with. So interest rate's the last one we're trying to figure out. So what I would be doing is backing into it and saying, okay, what term should I get it to equal 10% return? Right? Or 9.9, whatever it is, solve for the N in our financial calculators, and you'll get a better situation. The reason is that just like in a savings account, your bank account gives you 5% or 6%, right? If I go get my 5 and I want to buy a note, I don't want to make a 5% return. I want to get higher. And right now, if we're raising capital, our capital is not going to be at 4. We need it to be double-digit returns because capital today is really expensive. 8, 9, 10, 11%. So we need to beat that number to make our money, right? And most people who may have their own capital say, well, I don't want to go into a note getting a 6%, even if it's my own capital, because I might as well just go buy a CD at 5.5.
Yeah.
So the idea is that if you can change it and make the interest rate a higher number, if we're trying to buy it at 12 interest rate, a 12 yield, right, flat, and we'll get into partials, is that we have a yield chart that kind of shows you what the expected discount is on anything. If it's written at an 8 or 5 or 4, what is the discount expected if we're looking for a 12 or if we're looking for a 13? And you'll see that if you're writing at a 5 and you want to say you want a 12, you're looking at the fact that I'm going to make a probably 40% of balance thing. We never buy a percent of UPB, but we're just using for a sample the fact that because the interest rate's so low, we have to bid our number way down and give you such a discount to get it back up to a total of 12, because the payment per month and our purchase price result in. So we need to get that payment higher or the term lower. We need our money back faster. So that's why interest rate is such a huge deal. The interest rate and term drive all our numbers.
That's
the lower the
number
term
one,
or the
that's
higher the
number
interest
one
rate.
factor.
1 and 2, right?
Yeah.
You can have a 9% interest rate, but the problem is if I'm looking for a 10, I'm gonna have to give you a discount. So I'm gonna, on the side note, I'm gonna bring up my chart and I'll give you some actual examples. If you wrote a loan at, say, at 8%, and we're looking for a 12, 360 months, we're looking at 71% on $100,000. We buy $100,000 note for $71,000. If you were at an 8% note, $100,000 for 360 months, $71,000, we would make an offer, generally speaking. But if you made that thing at 10, we're up to 85% because of that number. So in the class we'll be working on later December, is that's one of the biggest features. Get the interest rate higher, and then just the term, because you can play with that number to get a term that works out.
And within reason,
sense?
of course, if you're going out 40, 50 years on the term, not so much.
Yeah, I was going to say Dodd-Frank might be a
Yeah.
little, might actually come into play on something like that.
Yeah. But that's the number one factor is what's your interest rate. So that's why we're big proponents of like boost it up as much as you can within reason. That payment has to be affordable, otherwise none of it works. But that's a big deal. Make sure that interest rate is nice and high.
I'm just running some numbers in the background to give you an example. If we had a, $1,500 a month payment, right, and you sold for $100,000, and if the loan's a 10% interest rate, that's 97 months, right? So it's easy to do. If that thing is now 300,000, and you need a $1,500 a month payment, it doesn't work, right? We get that, unless you go longer term, whatever, it just doesn't work. So we get all that, but we want to make sure that it makes sense. Because if you ever need to sell it, you're going to expect a huge discount if that doesn't happen, right? Down payment to us, 10% is good. We don't really kind of picky on that. The one thing we talk about in the class is seasoning, which is, will we table fund? I mean, buy at the table? We will, but our yield of return is going to be really high because we have no proven track history. Does that make sense, you guys?
Risk. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, a little more risk on that.
So what's your thoughts on this, feeling about stuff?
How can we work together? How can we do a bunch of deals?
Hey, I know you guys are, you're in the note world. It's actually how we can work together is that, Ken's way more versed in the note buying aspect than I am. But man, if you guys are looking for good notes, we'll have to start looking at interest rates. I do have a question for you though.
Yeah.
So let's say we pick something up subject to. Let's say we pick it up and that note was the terms of that note are less advantageous. Let's say that it was, I don't know, we bought it last year. This is like a this is a totally made up scenario, but that note was written last year and it was at it was at 7%.
Okay.
Right. However, that property's appreciated. The value of that property's gone up. I don't know. Let's say it's been 30%, which is not too far fetched.
Sure.
For the past couple of years. So now we've got that underlying at 7%. We go out, we find a buyer, we find that buyer at 11%. As long as that underlying note is, we can pay that off. And it's just imaginary numbers. Let's say that we're looking to sell the remainder of that, or we create two notes. Right. So we create a one for that underlying mortgage that covers that underlying mortgage. And now we have this other one.
Yep.
That is going to, we're going to sell both of those. We're going to sell both of those notes. You're going to pay the underlying off. Now you've got this other note hanging out there. So that for you would be, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be a scenario that would be advantageous to you, because now we've got a note that's sitting at 10% that, and it's not going to matter. It's basically a wash. You have you have the security, you have the property.
Yep.
You have the return that you're looking for. And so on 10%, let's say that you buy that at 85 and everybody gets paid. Everybody gets paid and the underlying gets paid off. Everybody's happy. Right?
So then you're talking about so when you sold it on wrap, you did it as a first and a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I guess it doesn't really matter, but
yeah. And personally, I would buy the first. However, I've got people that would buy the second. I was just talking.
Well, you guys can keep the second. You can literally
we keep it as our cash flow, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's now you're out of the deal completely. All your cash is out and you're clean and you're collecting a second, and typically that second's a little bit higher, right?
And even if it's $200-300 a month.
I guess my question is,
money.
what would be your desired spread there? Well, I guess you'd be paying that first off.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that would make sense.
Changing your hats. We're wearing hats here, right?
Yeah.
And we've spent an hour talking about the whole subject to stuff, and now we're moving on to the ideas. How can we help you guys create that note? You already found the borrower, you found the seller, you made all the connections. Now, how can you make that something you can get out of if you need to, or to cash flow and make some money, right? Because you bought it at a much different discount. And yeah, you can create 80-20, 85-15, and we're going to buy 85% to make our yield. And that's what comes into play here, is that calculation. So Hans asked the question, what are note buyers paying for CFDs that are not underwritten by RMLO, but are seasoned and have yields of 7 and 9%? So what I understand your question being yield, meaning the interest rate you wrote the CFD at 7 to 9%. Again, you can use a calculator and say, okay, if we say we want on a CFD, which is a little more risky, right? Because it's not a mortgage and note. What if we set it as, say, a 14? You can quickly figure out, estimatedly wise, that's a word, what is the estimated purchase price that a note buyer would buy it at. So set the calculator at 14 and say what discount it is. Now, Nathan may buy it at 13.5. I may be at 14, and someone else may say 17. And that's how you can kind of figure out, estimated wise, what we would expect to buy that note at.
So the factors there are what's the current interest rate? That's going to be the number one factor. Number two is it's a CFD. It's considered a little bit more risky. Number three, you said it didn't use an RMLO. Non-RMLO is not going to sell for as much.
Yep.
it can probably be fixed. I can probably go through and qualify that borrower through RMLO. However, that's going to cost me time and money, and just, manpower having to get it done. So those are the three factors that are going to be considered when talking about what kind of discount you're going to get. But there it is.
Yeah.
So
Love the question.
like you say, like a 14 is probably more realistic than a 12
Yep.
is what
Yep.
we're looking for at that point.
So yeah, that's one of the features, right? Is RMLO, CFD versus a mortgage versus a note. Those kind of things are coming to play. And for you guys doing wrap notes and with an underlying, I call it third-party borrower. I don't know what the word phrase is. You're really sub to another loan. We don't, as note buyers, want to buy that wrap note unless we pay off the underlying lien because of the messiness and the trust and all that stuff. I haven't ran into any note buyers who are okay with doing that the other way, but we want to pay it off. And I know the math doesn't make sense. Why are you paying off a 3% note? It's just the legality side of things. We've had Jeff Watson on talk about it. It just doesn't work for us.
Yep.
If and when it defaults, that would get really ugly and just not something we'd want to
Yes.
deal with.
No,
Yeah.
Keep it clean. Yeah.
Yes.
Keep it clean. Totally understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The
make
idea
sure
is for
do-
you to be the bank and not
Right.
have to pay another bank.
Exactly.
That's
It's
the
not
idea.
even paying the other bank. Is that if you had a deal where you had a hard money loan from Nathan, right? And you're the borrower and you wrap that note and there's no, I call it third party borrower, that I have no problem buying that note now because I know who the borrower with the original note is. It's when that third party person gets pushed aside is when it gets murky, right? You have to do a trust and all this stuff to get around it. We don't prefer that method. We'd rather you sit there and say, hey, I'm the borrower on this deal. I owe, 8% note to my hard money loan. I created a note at 11. I'd like to make sure that I can, I have no problem buying that wrap note because I know you're the underlying borrower and that they won't call the note and we have no trust issues, trust being the entity issues, those kind of things. That makes sense to you guys.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right.
And to
Go ahead.
answer, could I just say to answer? I think Nathan mentioned is like, how can we help each other's our communities and what we do and what you do and how to put that all together.
Yeah.
So one of the things Jeff and I like to do is we like to offer like turnkey methods and turnkey strategies for our people. So you, right, are a turnkey disposition strategy, right, to a large extent. So I think from a offering our community and your communities and what can we do, I'd like to talk, and we could talk more about this, but talk more about what are you looking for? You already mentioned like you're going to be doing
webinar,
information on what does that note need to look like, or even backing it up, like you're one of the few people that I've seen that are even entertain a contract for deed, right? A land contract, actually buying that. So what do those need to look like? How can we turnkey that to our community and offer structuring that so that then it's valuable to you on the disposition side, whether you buy it potentially, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's huge.
Fantastic.
Right. Nathan comes along. You guys have 10 CFDs. You need to buy it at, and I would encourage you guys to create these notes at a higher interest rate to avoid the huge discount, right? If you create a CFD at 9, he comes in and looks at 14, 15, the discount just gets disgusting. So we encourage you guys to do that. You guys are doing such awesome work, getting a hold of a seller, finding the property, and then creating this borrower at the back end of it and make sure the structure is legal and everything's great. We're just trying to fine tune the one little part of it that helps you guys dispose of it. So we even get into the fact you can sell partial. So if you had a situation, you can sell, instead of the whole note, you can sell 60 months of payments, right? We're not going to get into hypothecations, but in the partial world, you could sell a year payments, 6 months of payments, 10 years of payments. If you have a low first balance, you could do that and pay off. You say, Dave, I owe 38 grand on a $200,000 house at 3%. Could you give me 38 grand for a certain amount of payments? And I say, great. As long as you pay off the first, I'm cool with it. Yeah, no problem. And I get 60 months of payments at 14, slam dunk home run. I'm ecstatic. I'm getting my return. You guys are great. You guys are, and after 60 months, you're going to get the cash flow for the next 30 years or whatever long it is. So
And
we
the
want to make sure
partials
that
will be
you guys,
more in Dave's department.
Yes.
I'll look at the CFDs.
Yep.
Dave's gonna look at the partials.
yeah,
We got
yeah.
Well,
Right.
there's a second benefit there. I mean, that you know, you're looking at CFDs, Dave's looking at
Yeah, partials,
notes and
yeah.
partials, then there's yet another opportunity for us to maybe take the dive into more fully underwritten. I won't say fully underwritten. That's the wrong term, but to more qualified
Airtight.
on the qualified side versus
Yes.
non-qualified loans. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Airtight notes and contracts for deeds.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very good,
So-
guys.
So we have our before we go into the after hour party with you guys and we disconnect from the live crew.
Drinks are on Ken.
Yeah. We need your brainiacs, your knowledge, your experience. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. So I mean, you guys you've been around now for a little while now. You've seen some stuff. I get the feeling that sub 2 and all the creative finance is growing, and it's becoming more mainstream, for lack of a better term. But we're seeing more of it, that more than we did a couple of years ago, for sure.
Definitely.
What are you seeing coming up on the horizon? Are you looking at more of it coming up your way? Are you seeing a crash coming that's going to contribute to your business or our business, or what do you see coming down the pipe?
Well, I
Let
mean,
Ken go first. Okay, good, Jeff. Good, go first.
Okay, sorry,
6
sorry.
months a year. No, good, Jeff. 6 months a year from now, maybe 2 years. What are you seeing?
Well, I'm a kind of an outlier because I started doing this, you know, a long time ago when it wasn't popular.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I continually tell people is that, you know, because you got all the gurus now, all the gurus are saying, you know, now, you know, you hear them, they're slamming it. You brought somebody up earlier that just recently jumped into this stuff. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm going, okay, I've been doing this entire time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're not going to tell me that there isn't a best time to at least understand the stuff and get into it, because
Yes.
as I like to say, any time is a good time to understand creative finance, particularly subject to.
Well
If
said.
you know when to go out, and if you're looking at a mortgage that you're thinking about taking subject to, and you see the trends, you know that you know you'll get to this point where you see maybe a loan was originated in 2015, you automatically know that's something you're gonna go after,
Mhm.
because you know that interest rate is going to be stupid low. So I mean, I guess the answer to that question is there is no, you know, as long as the spread is there, as long as I know I can do something on it and make a spread, I don't see this coming to an end, not in my business. And I would recommend that anybody out there looking for on the creative side, never exclude creative financing from their strategies, because it has been a total game changer for me.
Well said. Ken,
Yeah.
what do you see? What do you see the housing market and the whole world of real estate? Are we looking at like a 20% crash coming up, or are we looking for prices to stay flat?
Well, that's a good crystal ball type of question, isn't it? But first, I'd like to agree with Jeff. Like, we've been doing creative financing and subject to just being one piece of a creative financing strategy for years now, right? But we didn't just jump on the bandwagon. So and I think Jeff's 100% correct. It's just going to continue. So knowing how to do that and putting the tool in your toolbox, right, which is our whole theme today, is definitely the thing to do. I do watch trends and things, especially here in our market, the St. Louis area, Missouri and Illinois specifically. And I mean, who the hell knows? I mean, I can't quite figure out, because just when I think I have one thing figured out, then something else changes. I do know this, though. Common sense says that the pressures in the market, the housing market, the high interest rates, all that, it can't continue without a correction.
Agreed.
Right. So, you know, I think like we need to really start preparing ourselves for what that means and how is that going to impact our business. Not that we have to rewrite and go back to the drawing board with what our business is or our particular real estate niche, but how can we adapt,
Yes.
right? And be flexible moving forward. And what do we need to do, right? So if we continue this high interest rate environment, obviously the seller financing stuff that we're talking about here today primarily is going to continue, right?
Sure.
And the opportunities there are going to continue to abound. We also have this mindset issue, I think, though, with the whatever we call them, the generation coming up, right? Those people that are at college age, I say that, right? I just turned 50, but those people that are college age that are coming up, right? Just kind of have this mindset, well, I'll stay at home until whatever's right. I'll live in the basement, or like, I don't know where that mindset came from, but we have to be able to adapt, because there's a large number of people that are going to be talking about, you know, am I getting married? Am I going to have kids? Am I going to move out? Am I going to rent? Am I going to buy? All those sorts of things. We need to be prepared to adjust and be able to help those people, right? We're here to help people. We solve problems. Jeff and I solve problems.
Yeah.
Like, we're pretty good at solving problems, right? Hence the whole creative finance strategy. So we just need to figure out what are those problems to solve for people, and how can that potentially benefit them and benefit us.
Awesome. Inside the comment box, there is a bit.ly link. If you want to get a hold of Ken or Jeff, use the bit.ly link and you'll get all the information emailed. And we'll go from there. Guys, it's been a pleasure hanging out for after hours, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in with us and spending the afternoon or the midday with us and sharing your experience, your knowledge, your years of just brain power to share with you guys. The time, energy is greatly appreciated, and the fact that you guys are willing to be open and honest and not closed-minded and not sharing details is very appreciated. We're really thankful for you joining us today.
Yeah, it's been good. Thank you.
Feeling is very, very mutual. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks so much for having us. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Well, guys, hang on for after hours. Everyone who's listening, we will see you soon. Our next webinar is December 15th. We're going to be having Dave Polio. If you don't know who he is, you'd want to.
You should. Yeah.
He'll be talking about the market, the status of the market of the note space. So enjoy your weekend, everyone. Have a great time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.